I've been asked to be on panels about breaking into writing, and I'm a terrible person to be on those kinds of panels because I don't talk about the agony of trying to find an agent or trying to find a publisher. You know, the publisher called me and asked me to write the book, and I called a top agent and said, I already have a publisher, would you be my agent? And so on. But one of the things that's happened in my career is that I've become deeply involved with the Mystery Writers of America and also the Horror Writers Association, and have met, and I'm proud to be friends with now, many, many writers. And I see a lot of them struggling, coming to programs, coming to workshops that are aimed at helping writers become better writers, waiting for the secret. They're waiting for somebody to tell them what they should be writing so that they can sell their book and make a lot of money. And the truth is, nobody knows. There is no key. You talk to any publisher, any agent of quality, any writer who's successful, and they will tell you that the key to being successful is to write a really good book. And if you're going to write a really good book, it has to be something that you're passionate about. You can't sit back and say to yourself, gee, I guess I better write a book about a lesbian dinosaur private detective who works in Seattle. All of those elements have been worked in other people's books, by the way. And that'll be a hit book. You can't do that. You've got to tell a story that you are passionate about. You've got to write a nonfiction book about something that you're passionate about, and hope to or try to communicate your passion to your audience. For me, these books are not academic exercises in any way. The only books I'm interested in writing about are books that I'm passionate about, that fascinate me, that have already demonstrated tremendous power. Sherlock Holmes has an enormous cult of followers and is an icon that is known throughout the world. Dracula is very much the same. My current project, and I haven't mentioned what it is, it's the Sandman comics by Neil Gaiman. 75 issues about Morpheus, the King of Dreams. An immensely successful comic book with an enormous audience out there that seems to have spoken to an entire generation. Neil quoted a survey that I'd actually discussed with him before he wrote the introduction. I had seen it too, that was done of English, I think, adolescents, and in which they were asked the basic question of whether the following people were real or fictional: Sherlock Holmes, Winston Churchill, King Arthur, people like that. And it was evident from the survey that there was a great deal of uncertainty about the answers. I teach a course on Sherlock Holmes and I'm about to teach a course on Dracula. And usually after the first hour of my Sherlock Holmes course, some student pipes up and says, Professor Klinger, I'm confused. Was Sherlock Holmes real or fictional? And my answer is always the same: yes. And it's those kinds of characters that appeal to me. The characters that are, we say, larger than life, but they are so real to us. They resonate with so many themes and so many aspects of interaction with our own lives that they are real to us. Sherlock Holmes, definitely real. I mean, known to virtually everyone in the world. In my book, I played a game. I played what Sherlockians have always called the game, which is that it's easy to explain why Bram Stoker wrote a bunch of forgettable books and this one brilliant one. And the answer is, this one brilliant one is true. It's based on historical fact, unlike his fiction. It's a game. It's the same game that the Sherlockians have played for a century, which is that the Sherlock Holmes stories are real, based on a true character, true person. But I think that it's a mirror of the quality of the writing and perhaps the inspiration for the writing. That these creatures you mentioned before, a book about monsters from the id, wonderful phrase out of Destination, Forbidden Planet. one of the great science fiction movies of all time. These people are that. They are, in many ways, everything that we want to be or that we're afraid we're going to be. And so they take on an aspect of life. They are real to us because we know them, we see them in ourselves. The Victorian age is an age very much fascinated with Darwin, fascinated with the idea of the origin of species and evolution and all that. And it's an idea struggling with science versus tradition, reason versus folklore. And so both in Sherlock Holmes and Dracula, we see those confrontations. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is the icon of reason, and really the epitome of the idea that chaos, bad things can be overcome if you're just smart enough, if you're observant enough. And I think that explains to a large extent the popularity of the stories, that people saw him as bringing, I think, detective fiction in general, bringing order out of chaos, bringing comfort back to you when life is hard. And life in London was hard, especially if you weren't lucky enough to be in the upper middle class or upper class. It was not a good time to be a woman, to be a person of color, to be in service as a household worker or even an industrial worker. The streets of London were filled with horse manure, and it smelled terribly, and there was pollution everywhere. And we forget that part. We get very nostalgic about the golden age of the Victorian times when Queen Victoria was on the throne and everything was right. Well, everything was right, as I said, if you were upper middle class or a professional and all that. But Holmes really delivered the idea to the masses, because remember, this was a huge mass success, not just for the upper class readers, that someone could be smart enough to take care of things, to survive and get along and deal with problems and answer questions and right wrongs and grab criminals. They were still learning about the police. The police was a relatively new invention of the 19th century, and the police weren't really trusted yet. And so the idea of a gentleman like Sherlock Holmes who could do this was very appealing. Similarly, Dracula is kind of the same theme. The good guys win. Here's this creature of folklore and superstition invading modern London, and very much modern London. I mean, these are figures that, when you look at the Harkers and Dr. Seward and the like, they're typing on typewriters, they're dictating into dictating machines, they're sending telegrams and all that. It's really, somebody characterized it as office equipment versus vampires. Very comforting to the Victorian to see reason and science prevail. Most people don't buy my thesis that Dracula survived. In fact, at the end of the book, we see Dracula stabbed by Jonathan Harker. I hope I'm not spoiling this for anyone. Jonathan Harker and Quincy Morris with their knives, and he turns into dust. And Mina remarks that she sees almost beatific look on his face just as he turns into dust. So we're certainly given the impression that he has died and returned to peace. His soul is at rest. I argue that this is nonsense. Dracula didn't die at the end because, first of all, they didn't use the techniques that they were told all along were the proper vampire killing techniques, which was a wooden stake, not steel knives, a wooden stake through the heart, cut off his head, etc. And that in fact what happened was that Dracula used his power to transform into a mist just at that moment, and so vanished. I think the book has other lies in it as well. It has lies about where Dracula's castle is. It has lies about some of Dracula's powers. And I've suggested, and you can at least see me winking as we say this, that this is because Dracula himself came back and coerced Bram Stoker into twisting the truth to cover up the reality that he had survived.